Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Words, Images, and Worlds, a comic-centric creative edition. Delighted to be talking on this episode with author David Avallone. Thank you, David, for jumping in. May I call you David? Is that okay?
You may absolutely. I am not formal like that. And thank you so much for inviting me, Jason.
Yeah, my pleasure. I am loving the bookshelf in your background. Mine is, of course, digital, but I'm seeing some books that I love and some creations that I love back there with Elvira and
Yes,
some of those
Elvira
pieces.
being held up by my Comic-Con passes for next week
Oh, love it.
or 2 weeks ago, depending on when you if someone's listening on audio.
True, true. Yeah. Yeah, I keep wanting to make it out to the big show, the big SDCC, but I haven't yet. I tend to go to
It's
GalaxyCon in Raleigh, or
that's yeah,
Charlotte.
I've
But
I've heard good things about that con. I've never been.
yeah.
I'm getting a little cranky in my old age about attending as a civilian. So if I'm getting on a plane, I need to have been at least a little bit invited.
This is a
I
good
don't even
thing.
need to be a lot. I probably shouldn't even say public. I don't even need to be a lot invited. I don't need the mint on the pillow. I don't even necessarily need the hotel room, but you got to give me a reason to show up. I can't just be wandering around with with nothing much to do. And it's been a
Yeah.
good couple of years for that, honestly. But San Diego has never invited me as a guest, and I'm not holding my breath. They're not real big on Dynamite Comics down there. But
Uh,
but it is. I love it. I go every year, but it is also the Bataan Death March of comics.
right.
It is an Iron Man. I mean, there are cons that are almost that long that are 4 days, but it's its own beast and it is
Yeah.
huge. And I am huge for anyone that's going to be there next week who's hearing this beforehand. You will find me at the Bayfront Hilton drinking in the bar most days.
Mhm.
And if you look in the program, I have four, might be no five. I have five panels, and I'm doing two signings. One with the Geekscape at their
Nice,
booth. They
nice,
very nicely invited me to come sign some books, and one with CGC
nice.
because I'm fancy like that. They are going to slab me in carbonite and sell me to the highest bidder.
Very Han Solo. Love
Yeah,
it. What's the drink of choice at the local bar there by any
I
chance?
I myself am years and years and years ago I decided to uncomplicate my tastes, and I mostly just drink straight vodka. It's the drink they never get wrong.
Yes. Yeah. True,
Like
true,
they
true.
can't if what you're asking them to do is pour a shot of glass vodka in a glass with some ice, it is hard to fuck that up. Uh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
also I don't like waiting for it. So
Hmm.
like there was a period when like everyone and their mother was ordering mojitos, and I'm like, I don't have time to watch you pound with a rock. God damn it. I want my drink now. Like, that's just, I'm not here to watch chemistry, man. Just
Yeah.
pour pour the liquid in a glass for me, and I'm pretty happy. I also have a whole philosophical thing about drinking and about vodka, which is that everything else lies to you. Everything else says to you, I am delicious. I am a beverage. I have a
Hmm.
flavor.
Hmm.
Vodka is like, son, you just
No.
drank poison. You just
That's true.
you're trying to derange your senses. You drank a little poison. You took a little bite of death so that you can derange your senses, and that's what you're doing. And let's all be clear about that. That's why we're drinking here. We're not drinking because the whiskey has a smoky flavor. It's like, no, that's a bunch of bullshit. You're ingesting a chemical that will disorder your brain, and that is the point. And I
It
appreciate
does.
I appreciate the honesty of that. Also, half of my genetic background is Jews from Odessa, which are it's a big vodka drinking minority. So
Nice, nice.
that may have some bearing.
There's a clarity to vodka,
Yeah.
both as far as the intention and the appearance. So
Yeah.
I think that works. I like it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's nothing going on in there that you don't know about. Every once in a while, I will shake it up. A white Russian is like when you're in the mood for a vodka milkshake.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and I want some. I would like a chocolate milkshake with my poison. Fantastic. But yeah.
Arsenic and Old Lace. Love it.
Exactly.
Love it. Yeah.
That is exactly right.
Yeah. Well, we've covered the potent potables
We
category of
have,
our
we
of
have.
our podcast
Very
Jeopardy.
important to talk about liquor on a comics podcast.
Absolutely. They go hand in hand. Um so let's talk the comics category really quickly,
Sure.
or maybe not really quickly, but um what was it about comics? Because you're obviously on the fandom side as well as someone who attends
Oh
uh
yeah, since I've been
the
going to
cons.
cons, I think my first con it was might have been 1979, and I would have been 14,
Nice.
in my little
Nice.
gold Captain Kirk uniform.
Love it.
Uh, and by the way, I still have that shirt, and it used to like hang loosely off me. Uh, like someone had bought it for me, and it was like a small adult size, but I was 14, so it was still too big for me. And now it clings to my bulk in a very third season Shatner kind of a way that is
Hmm.
just as comical, you know. It makes me feel tired and like I want the show to be over. But yeah, it's I've been going for a really long time, and it sounded like you were about to ask, what drew me to writing
Hmm.
comics.
That
And
was the direction.
the funny thing is my dad was a novelist, and I think I wasn't particularly trying to not be like him, but that was his career, and I was more interested in film and worked in film, still work in film since 1986. But as a writer in film, I never really got much traction.
Hmm.
Comically, again, since becoming a comic book writer, I now get the best film and television jobs I've ever gotten. Um,
Nice.
no one, when I had been making indie films for 30 years, no one wanted to hear anything I wanted to say. But comic books suddenly, I was the way in which the people with the money who finance the arts, they don't want to be the first one to take a chance on you ever.
Hmm.
So a publisher taking a chance on you, various licensors taking a chance on you, legitimizes you.
Yeah.
And now you're legitimate and you can work on anything, within reason. So around 2014, I was really burning out on film. I mean, literally the last two films I worked on ended with legal hassles, not for me, but for
Mm.
the people behind them. And it just made me tired. And around that time, a colleague had asked to read an old screenplay of mine for a film project that got abandoned when the stock market crashed and the investors in that film vanished in a puff of smoke. And they read it and went, "Hey, this is really good. I can't help you in film, but I know some comic book editors and I could introduce you to someone." And they introduced me to Joe Rybant, and we actually met at San Diego Comic Con. And I won't go off on my whole rant about networking because it's a thing I sometimes talk about in panels and teach at cons, because I think people radically misunderstand
Mhm.
networking. But I will boil it down simply to this: everyone always complains people only hire their friends. And I say that's right. So when you're networking, you are not a job applicant, you are looking to make a new friend.
Mhm. Mhm. That
And
makes
if you
sense.
make a new friend, I'm partnered with Kevin Eastman on something, and he's one of my closest friends in the world, dearest friends. And when we met, we talked about World War II comics that we both loved. I don't know
Yeah.
that the word Ninja Turtle escaped my lips for a solid year. The first year we knew each other, because it just didn't
Hmm.
come up.
Yeah.
And, he asked me to write something with him. Uh, I honestly don't know if he had read a single comic that I had written at that point, but he had spent hours talking to me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we had become friends. And I think, you talk to someone, you can see how their mind works, and whether
Hmm.
or not they're funny, whether or not they can tell an anecdote. As
True.
silly as that sounds, that's a better, I hate Mel Gibson, but he said a thing about auditioning once that I've never forgotten, and I agree with him, which is, everybody that you're calling into audition, it's not like at the level he's working at, it's not like they can't act. It's not like you're going to get someone in and they're not a good actor. He's like, so
Hmm.
I don't really, and again, reminder, he's garbage and I hate him. But he said, But he said, I call someone in and we talk for a half hour
Yeah.
about whatever. That's how the decision is made. Because
Hmm.
part of it is, can we get along? Can we collaborate? Do our minds work in ways that will be complementary to one another? So all that said, I had a really nice time talking to Joe at the Odyssey Bar at the Bayfront Hilton in San Diego, which I
Hmm.
honestly 80% of my comics work has been handshake deals in that bar, which is funny. And he went back to New York and said, I got something for you, which turned out to be Legendary Vampirella, which again, I think he knew of my because of my dad being an older man who was born in 1924. I was
Hmm.
raised with the pulps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm one of the few people under 60 that can write a Doc Savage or The Shadow without
Hmm.
having to look at the Wikipedia page and figure out who they are. I
Yeah.
mean, like,
Yeah.
I know those characters. I've been reading them since I was a kid. So I think that was appealing to him because Dynamite had those licenses at the time. And
Hmm.
this was a steampunk thing with sort of an old timey vibe to it, a universe created by Bill Willingham called Legendary. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I talked to Joe. Bill had approval of whoever picked up his universe to work on it. So I had like an hour long conversation with Bill to get his approval. And he asked, "What are you going to do with my characters?" And I told him what I had in mind, and we had some laughs. And so that was, and honestly, people sometimes wonder why I've stuck with Dynamite. They have kept me in print since 2014. Like there have
Yeah.
been there have been gaps. There will be, I just wrote Elvira in Monsterland #5, and Huber will start drawing that sometime this morning.
Hmm.
But and I don't know what the now I haven't pitched the next Elvira series yet. We got a bunch of things that we're working on and longer term projects, but like they've had a gig for me at least once a year, if not 3 times a year, if not 5 times a year sometimes.
Nice.
Since
Nice.
since 2014, and it's hard to walk away from that. And I
Yeah.
also have an enormous amount of creative control over what I do. In the Elvira comics, Cassandra Peterson reads every script and gives me notes, usually very kind notes. God bless her. And
Hmm.
usually a minimum of, or I should say, a maximum of about 2 or 3 joke suggestions.
Nice.
She always
Nice.
says she always says the same thing. She always says, "Oh, and you don't. These are just suggestions. You don't have to take these." And I'm like, "They're Elvira jokes written by Elvira. I think I'm going to use them."
There's an authenticity there. I like that.
Your Elvira jokes aren't going to be worse than my Elvira. So like, let's stick with the let's stick. But yeah, she's always been very complimentary about my work since the first issue. So that's been a real relief because that can, working with a living person who controls their own image
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
be challenging. She is tough on our cover artists, I'm told.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
her, if it was my face going on the comics,
Yeah.
I would definitely be tough on the cover artist and say, no, that's not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That makes
so
sense.
yeah. So long story short, that's how I stumbled backwards into comics. It was just I was at a complete career dead end. I was mostly editing feature films. And I was just it's funny. If anyone I used to work with hears this, all of the wrong people will think I'm talking about them
That's how it works.
when
That's
I'm
how it
not.
works.
But
Yeah.
I got really tired of turning other people's mediocrity into something that was merely good. I
Yeah.
rarely got great footage to turn into something excellent, and I often got terrible footage to turn into something mediocre. Like, I had a friend at the time, about a decade ago, probably, who was editing Mad Men. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, oh, it must be such a challenge working with all of that beautifully written and performed and exquisitely directed raw footage. How hard for you that must be. I always feel
Yeah.
like the best editing Oscar, best editing Emmy should go to the person who had the shittiest material to deal with. Because they
Right.
worked a
Right.
lot harder than the guy editing The Sopranos or the person editing, The Bear.
Hmm.
Not to say
Hmm.
it's not demanding, but when you walk in and the footage is great,
Yeah.
I can't
What's the
say
gem that you
I
choose from the
I have
case?
yeah, I haven't had that experience as much as I wanted to. Where it was, and like when I what I meant was like the people who I made perfectly fine, lovely, good, solid, great films with will listen to this and say, "Oh, he's talking about me," and the absolute hacks will hear this and go, "Well, he's definitely not talking about me. I'm a fucking genius." So,
That's
there's
the
no.
irony.
I often avoid talking about it in public for that reason because you just know the nice people will be, oh, I suck, and the terrible people will be like, well, he can't mean me. I'm a genius.
I'm
Anyway,
excellent. Yeah. Yeah.
so
It's interesting that you mentioned Mad Men because when we were talking about the chemistry experiment of vodka and other things, I was thinking about the old-fashioned scene where Don Draper is making an old-fashioned. So just an interesting little connection there. I thought I would throw out in
oh yeah,
this thread. Not
yeah.
not to take us back to that Jeopardy
No, it's
category, but just kind
it's
of
a good
fun.
category.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you were talking about film, so I love that Elvira is actually part of the process. As a reader,
Sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
I don't know how the comics cover artist feels about that, but that is a very cool thing to me that it would still be something that is sort of passed by her to
Oh yeah.
approve and to be part of because that's just it's part of the magic of it. And I can't even imagine trying to tell some of the mashups, which is what I've really enjoyed about Dynamite and your work. I
Oh
think I
yeah.
mentioned Elvira and Vincent Price. Can you imagine trying to get that made as a film
Oh
or
yeah. Well, and I
Shadow
will
and
say
Twilight Zone?
the nicest I gotta say one of the nicest compliments I have ever been paid by someone remaining completely silent. Victoria Price also read the scripts for those and had
Hmm.
approval. And I did not receive a single, my dad would never say that. My dad would never do that. Like
Oh, wow.
silence. And I have never been more flattered by silence in my life. The fact that Victoria Price read those 5 scripts and there was not a comma out of place for her. I mean, it's
Yeah.
her dad. I have a hard time imagining someone writing, 100 pages of comics about my father and me not going, hey, he
Hmm.
wouldn't say that. But Vincent was such a beautiful man, and he had such an amazing. I mean, the interesting thing is, I wasn't writing about Vincent Price as Prospero. Yeah, I wasn't writing about Vincent Price as a character in one of his movies. I was writing
Hmm.
about the man, the actor, the movie star, and bon vivant, and cook, and art collector, and all of that.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was such an indelible presence
Hmm.
as a personality, he was so just like, and I say this about Elvira, people are very nice and compliment me for getting the voice right. But I always say Cassandra established such, she established a character who she walks into any room, you know what she's going to say.
Hmm.
You know what the joke is. You just know.
Yeah.
And the one out of 1,000 times I don't know, I've got her there.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was one time in issue 3, I'll never forget this. There was a panel and I was burned out. I was probably writing it at 3 in the morning, and I just didn't have a good quip. I didn't have anything.
Mm.
And I didn't leave it blank, but I put something in that was mediocre. And I'm not even remotely humble about my own work. I don't think anything I do is mediocre. But I left in a line that I was like, it, that's not a great panel. Nothing, there's no entertainment value in that panel. Uh,
Hmm.
when David Costa draws it, it will be lovely to look at, but there's nothing interesting about the dialogue. And I thought to myself, I bet you anything she catches this. And she had 2 notes on that issue. And she's like, here, I've got a couple of alts for, page 15, panel 4, whatever it was. Like nope, that is not on brand. And the thing is, it wasn't, neither thing was life changing or, what she came up with wasn't, it was a very small moment. It was a
Hmm.
microscopic moment. It just, the nature of comic books, it needed a quip
Yeah.
to go with
Yeah.
it. It was Elvira walking away from Dracula, from Vlad the Impaler. And I just didn't have anything for it. And she added a RuPaul reference, and I had forgotten she was a judge on RuPaul's show. So she said something about, I'll, like RuPaul says, I'm just going to sashay away. And again, that's not like going to change anyone's life, but it was I had nothing. I came up empty. I didn't have anything for it. And instead of working on it for another 5 hours on some dumbass line, I went, you know what? I'm probably covered here. She'll catch this.
Yeah.
Uh, and also, I should say, process wise, I don't know how. I'd like to think this is common. Sometimes I hear it's less common than I want it to be, but I always do a dialogue pass
Hmm.
after the ink. After the final ink, I always take, and I know comic art writers like John Layman letters his own books largely so that literally he wants to step beyond me. He wants to keep rewriting it while it's being lettered. uh
Hmm.
I'm willing to let Taylor Esposito, it's like almost always Taylor Esposito, take over for me at that point and do the lettering. but but yeah, I always rewrite, and sometimes they're pretty big rewrites. They can't be that big with Elvira because
Hmm.
she's already approved everything. But like when I'm not writing something for a license holder, I will sometimes sketch in dialogue, because what you got to get right is the images for the artist to draw.
Hmm.
Uh, the the jokes and the quips and the observate, the dialogue can always use one more finesse. Uh,
Hmm.
and a lot of times an artist will draw a thing that I didn't exactly ask for, or is funnier than what I asked for, or
Nice.
honestly, in bad cases, is very different from what I asked for, but I didn't quite have the energy or the heart to tell them. Like sometimes I'll see a thing and I'm like, well, that's not what I meant at all, but I'm gonna come up with a way that works.
Nice.
And
Nice.
and then you add a line of dialogue that makes it clear. I mean, I think so much bad comic writing, particularly what we associate with bad comic writing from the 70s and the 80s, is
Hmm.
lack of faith in the artist
Hmm. Hmm.
and lack of faith in the reader.
Yeah.
I always use this example, but like the worst, God bless Chris Claremont, but some of that editorial dictate that everything has to be clear. Like you'll see an opening page of the Quinjet landing on Muir Island, and like Cyclops and Xavier are coming out of the plane, and Cyclops is like, I don't understand, Professor Xavier, who controls minds. Why are we here on Muir Island visiting? Well, Cyclops, who can shoot eye beams and is in love with Jean Grey and has a red. Yeah, it's like, oh, Jesus Christ. Stop, stop it. Stop telling me everyone's name and their powers and their, you know, uh, I always say this. I love the inside front cover is the greatest invention in comics in the last 30 years. The
Yeah.
the the fact that we can now just here's your last time on. We don't have to do that on page one of we don't have to gunk up page one of my comic with a bunch of stuff that the people who read the last issue are going to find vaguely insulting and definitely boring.
All of the continuity. All of
Yeah.
the continuity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I made in the first two issues of Elvira, I made jokes about her. The very first two, I had her doing the recaps, and then she gives me a shout out and says, "I'm not doing these anymore, Avallone. These belong on the front inside cover. What are you doing?"
Love it. Love it.
My naked attempt to get my name out there because I'm no fool.
That I can't remember the age I was when I realized like, oh, these names that are listed here at the beginning of the comic, these are the people that made this. Because there
Mhm.
is a time reading comics where I just kind of, soaked up the magic of it. But then it's like, oh, there are five people that do this, and to kind
Oh
of check
yeah,
out.
and I can absolutely say that when I growing up wanting to make movies, I was very attentive to how they were made and who made them. Like if you'd asked me when I was 7 years old who Frank Capra was, I would have been able to tell you.
Mhm.
But I never looked at comic books that way. I never, I knew the writers and the artists that I liked. In some cases, by the 80s, I knew the letterers that I liked.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will still give John Workman a shout out and script and say I need a John Workman theme here.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I never looked at how they were made particularly.
Yeah.
I read them as a completely as a reader. And by the way, I should say, like, viewing movies that way has never ruined them for me. It's part of the enjoyment of them.
Hmm.
But like when I got the first offer to like, do you want to write a comic book script? I literally went to my shelf and pulled down Watchmen and went, Huh. 9 panels on every page.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Pull down New Frontier. 3 panels on every page, 3 CinemaScope panels on every page. And then every once in a
Yeah.
while you break them up. Fascinating. This is what Frank Miller is doing. This is what Howie Chaykin is doing. Howie. He
Mm-hmm.
would kill me for calling him Howie. Howard Chaykin is doing. Like, this is what. And then, and I talked to artists and they said, keep it at 5 panels a page if you can.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
generally do. I like clockwork. My pages are pretty much 5 panels because I think that's appropriate for what I'm doing. And every once in a while I'll shake it up. But it's I was I have to say that I started writing comics at 49, and I
Wow.
absolutely recommend taking on a completely new craft
Uh-huh.
at 49 or whenever, because it was so revitalizing. And I had read the Scott McCloud before. I read it all again because
Yeah. Yeah.
last time I wasn't reading it to learn, you know, I wasn't reading it as a trade school student. I was reading it as an admirer. And this time I was like, oh, I should pay more attention to this. So, I think that's not to get off on a rant, but it's a it's a it's a serious art form enjoyed by the entire world. Only in America do we sort of look down our noses at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people who come into it the way I did don't take it seriously enough. The number of phone calls I've gotten, particularly during times like this strike, of like, "Hey man, what about comics? I'm not writing any TV this year." Um, and you go, I always say the same thing, which is, if what you want is a pamphlet to leave behind after a pitch, don't do it, man. Don't. If you love comics and you think your screenplay or your TV idea would make a great comic, fucking go for it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I will teach
Yeah.
you everything I can about the medium. But if it's just to accomplish the pamphlet thing, you're going to spend a lot of time and money and you're fucking hate yourself. And so, like, don't do it. Don't do it. But it's an amazing art form. I like to argue that it's the oldest one.
Oh, I
Um,
like that. Yeah.
it occurred to me about 2, 3 years ago. I was like, cave painting. Here is Og with spear. Here is the mammoth. Here is Og chasing the mammoth with the spear. Here's Og
Mm-hmm.
standing on top of the mammoth with his spear in the mammoth. Here's us eating the mammoth.
Sequential art.
Sequential art is like, maybe people sang before that, but there's no physical evidence to,
Yeah.
there might have been singing, there might have been storytelling, but Og on the cave wall with the spear, man, that is the shit. That is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the
First
first
superhero.
the first yeah the first well Gilgamesh, the
Yeah.
first human, you know art that we have preserved is generally, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened in these 5 panels that I've painted on this cave wall. And that's the human desire to do that, and the plasticity of it,
Mm-hmm.
and all of
Mm-hmm.
the things you can do with it. It's been so revitalizing for me, and it is really uh it has been such a surprise left turn late in my life that I'm endlessly grateful for.
I love that because I read recently someone on one of the social media outlets said, once you get to this age, there's still that myth out there, which I guess is true in baseball, maybe. Like maybe you're throwing art. Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of continuing to learn and take up new storytelling, new craft. And I also love what you said there about it's a complex medium that deserves some attention. And I have an interview later today where I'm being interviewed and someone's asking me about comics and uh, what role they play, and are they just there to sort of like support readers? I'm like, no, no, they're incredibly complex books that anybody can dig into and enjoy.
And they can be about anything, and they can be for anyone, and you can tell literally any story
Mhm.
in them, and they're not limited to bright colors, and it's, and again, the technology has gotten so much better
Yeah.
than it used to be. I think a lot of the flashy comics on costumes on superheroes, once again, was the, like, well, the artist can't really draw this guy on model for 20 pages, but if he's got the same outfit on every time we see him,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
doesn't matter if his nose gets a little bigger, or smaller, his chin goes back and forth. You know what I mean? Like, it makes it simpler to read and easier to do as a job. And I just, the quality has gone through the roof. It's comic books, there's a lot of amazing stuff from the golden age and from the silver age and from my childhood, but you can't argue that like television was better in the 70s than it is now. You can't
No.
argue that comic books were better 10 years. Anyone who argues that books were better in the 90s has a serious arrested development problem. At least in my personal experience. Maybe I'm just not that into pouches. I don't know. But it's people are taking these mediums more seriously and doing more groundbreaking work in them.
Yeah.
And I'm not claiming my Elvira comics are the most groundbreaking thing out there, but I'm doing some other stuff. And they're entertainments. The best review I could ever get, Elvira in Horrorland #3, reviewer said it read like a really good Mad Magazine parody. And I was like, that's it, man. That's all I'm at.
Love it.
That
Love
is
it.
the target I am literally specifically aiming at. There's even a
Yeah.
joke about Mad Magazine in Monsterland 2, she calls it, which is the Shining issue. She
Yeah.
calls
Yeah.
the she calls the character played by Scatman Crothers Hollerin, as in yelling,
Uh-huh.
hollering instead
Uh-huh.
of Halloran. And she calls him Hollerin, and he says, "Wasn't that what they called me at the Mad Magazine satire?" And she's like, "Who can remember?"
Nice. Nice. Nice.
Because I literally I wrote it and I went, "Oh, did Angelo Torres call him that in 1979 or 1980? I don't remember. I could be
So
borrowing this joke from my subscription to Mad Magazine from my childhood."
so some
Uh,
of that inner monologue comes onto the page. I love
oh,
that.
absolutely. Well, that's the greatest thing about Elvira is that I get to do that. Is I get to do all of the fourth wall breaking things. I
Yeah.
loved in not to praise my own work, but in Elvira Meets Vincent Price when he says, "Do you want to come on this adventure with me?" And she says, "Oh my God, that'll be great." And he's like, "Oh, thank God." The refusal of the call is
It's
is
been
just
done.
the most boring part of that whole thing. Like, and she says, like, I blame George Lucas. He made everybody read Joseph Campbell. And,
Hmm.
and Vincent, being Vincent, says they should be reading Shakespeare instead. Um,
Love it.
but
Love it.
but yeah, but that comes from the very honest place of, to me, refusal of the call is one of those things. People do it without knowing how to do it well.
Hmm.
There are
Hmm.
ways to get around. Like, I totally believe that Luke Skywalker doesn't just want to get up and leave the only world he's ever known and go to the center of the galaxy and fight the Empire. Like, that's a big ask.
Yeah.
That's a good refusal to call. I'm not the biggest fan of those movies, but Neo being unwilling to walk out on the ledge,
Yeah.
because come on, man, who's going to do that? Yeah, I'm not. Some voice tells me to do a thing, and I'm going to do it. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
But a
Yeah.
lot of times, it's just like Rambo's got to say no for another 10 minutes before he
Mhm.
goes and does the thing, and I'm like, I don't care, man. Just go do the thing.
Or
That's what I
the
love about. That's what I love about James Bond. There's no refusal of the call. You
he's
hand him a
in.
file folder, he will do the thing. you
And he
know?
will go rogue every time to get the thing
Yeah,
done. If you tell him
but
not to
but
do the thing, he's like, "No, you
yeah,
hired me. I'm gonna do the thing."
but yeah, you hand him a file folder with some European character actor's face on it. That dude is toast.
Yes.
That is the job. There is no. Well, I don't know. This guy seems nice. Like,
Well, what I really critique about that too is so often the reversal of the refusal, whatever that second stage is called. It's
yeah,
usually just accomplished in like one or two scenes where a character looks at a picture of like someone they love and they're like, you know what?
yeah,
Arbitrarily, it's time to say yes. We
yeah.
knew it was
No,
going to
that
happen anyway.
it just always feels like connecting of dots. And when you're filling out the formula, I've told this story a couple of times recently, but there's the whole thing about, to make a character likable, the bad studio note is, have him pet a dog or something.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it's like that's the joke version, and you're
Yeah.
supposed to think of something better than that. At the beginning of Outbreak, about 5 minutes in, I saw it at a screening, which was probably like 50% screenwriters in the audience. And in 5 minutes in, there's an opening scene, and then we see Dustin Hoffman at home, and he goes out his front door, and a dog comes bounding up to him, and he pets the dog, and half of the room fell out of their chairs laughing. So because it was just
Yeah,
like it was such this is a prickly, difficult man. Show him petting a dog or some fucking thing, because we it's not always easy to like Dustin Hoffman. Let's have him cuddle a Benji for 5 minutes, and
right, right.
it was so nakedly out of place in this, second-rate Andromeda strain thriller to have a guy just like, here he is at home petting his dog. Isn't he great? Okay, now back to the virus is going to kill the world. It's just so like you never want to be the guy writing the dog petting scene. I mean, to boil it down, I think the job of a writer, and Goldman talks about this a lot in his books, and how you can even overdo reversals, but the job of a writer is you always hit a scene and you go, okay, so how has everyone else gotten out of this scene?
Hmm.
I have to not do that.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
to come up with the version of this that's never been done before. You
Tackle
know,
the new.
yeah. James Bond coming up with a reason for Goldfinger not to kill him
Hmm.
instead of having some wild escape plan.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, you got the hero
Love it.
tied up. How are you going to get him out of it? That's the tricky part.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation. Lots of worlds and ideas about writing, and we started with a great conversation about potent potables. So the last category on our board is upcoming work, upcoming projects, things that are in development. You mentioned that you have a podcast. If you'd like to
I
talk
do. I
about
have a
that.
couple of them actually. The first thing is that currently in stores is Elvira in Monsterland.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, first two issues are out as of this recording. The third one will drop sometime in July. I don't actually know when. And then that goes up to issue 5. First issue was called "It's a Vlad World," which was
Hmm.
not my title. Richard Fairgray came up with it, which is delightful. Premise of this series is that, like the previous series, we developed that all movies create their own little pocket universes, and Elvira was in the last series. She was sort of bouncing from movie to movie, and in
Hmm.
this series, the our series supervillain Vlad the Impaler has the MacGuffin that makes you able to jump between universes, and he is kidnapping an army of monsters to conquer the world. And second issue was our Frankenstein issue.
Hmm.
Frankie Goes to Hollywood. The third issue is called Howl. You can probably guess what that one's about.
Hmm.
The fourth issue, which I just saw the art, the final art for today, is called "You Don't Look Kaiju-ish."
Oh,
Um,
nice, nice.
Thank you. Which is our Gojira issue. And then the fifth one is the wrap up Mad Monster Party, which is satire of all sorts of things. We'll see if Cassandra likes it. I don't think I've had notes on it yet, but we make fun of some superhero movies in there.
Love it, love it.
Because with the setup, I kind of had to go Endgame in the last issue.
Mm-hmm.
I had giant armies of monsters. You got to do something with that.
Hmm.
So there's an Elvira original graphic novel that we're 74 pages into writing and drawing. It was so much fun a week ago when I could say that we were 69 pages into it, because everyone could just go, nice. But we're 74 pages now. It's probably going to top out at 100 or 120. I'm still kind of laying the track in front of the train as we go along. And other comic stuff, there are really exciting things. It's been a very frustrating year for me. I've had a lot of great stuff going on, all in the company hasn't decided to put out a press release announcing
Yeah.
it yet. Stuff.
The land of NDA.
Yeah. So I've got a creator owned comic that's gonna be coming from a really great publisher. I got another creator owned comic that is going to be coming from a different really great publisher. If either of those deals, one of those deals is signed, the other one is still pending. And there's some media stuff going on with one of my creator owned things, which I'm really excited about. But again, can't I'm hoping by San Diego I will actually. It would be goofy to let San Diego go by
Mhm.
without announcing these two projects in particular. Um, During 2020, during the pandemic, I started two podcasts. One on my own called Pulp Today.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
Pulp Today's been on hiatus for a little bit, but there are 74 episodes of me reading a couple of pages from a book that I love and explaining why I love it and telling a little bit about the history. I have had great guests on it. Comics writer David Walker was one of my first guests. Actor James Urbaniak, actress Meghana Tova, actress Susie Kane. Um, Susie Kane, that was a fun one because I wanted to do. It was the 42nd episode, and I wanted to do Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for the 42nd. And I always let the host, the guest, choose their own book. But
Hmm.
for Hitchhiker's Guide, I was like, I need an English person to do the reading.
Yes,
I'm not
yeah,
gonna inflict my accent. And Susie is so great, and she has such a phenomenal voice for the encyclopedia, for the Hitchhiker's Guide. So we had a lot of fun. And then that devolved into an hour-long chat about the history of British comedy. But that's
love
what
it,
that
love
show
it.
is like. The other show was created by Ryland Grant, who very nicely offered me to co-host. I'm actually going to be recording another episode of that in about 45 minutes. Called The Writer's Block. It has won multiple awards, including awards I've heard of, like
Nice, nice.
the Communicator Award for arts podcasts. And we talk generally about writing, but about writing comic books, about writing. I mean, it's definitely comic book mostly, but like the last 2 months, we've had a lot of WGA members on to talk about the strike and why it's important and how
Hmm.
the decisions being made about the Writers Guild are rippling across all of the professional arts right now, and why we should all be invested in the WGA's fight,
Yeah,
member of the guild or no. So, Writer's Block, a new episode drops generally every Wednesday on Comic Book Day, for new Comic Book Day, and those are we're up to like 93, 94 of those. There are a lot of those.
nice, nice, nice.
So that's another thing you can seek out, and again, that those both of those shows exist on YouTube, but also on most of the podcast platforms. And I
Fantastic.
think that's it. And again, if you're going to San Diego, I am easily found for all fans, stalkers, assassins, and you know whatever, whoever else is looking for me. But yeah, that's what I got. I should say, last thing, I've been doing some prose writing lately, and
Love it.
there's an anthology coming out called The Dead Detective Society.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And for that, I resurrected a character. They came to me and said, we're doing this anthology about dead detectives. And I think, the editor has a zombie detective character that he writes. There are a couple of other characters like that. I don't have any character just lying around like that. And at first I thought of like a zombie Sherlock Holmes thing, but
Hmm.
instead there was a 19th century private detective named Nick Carter, who is actually the most published American action hero, because he
Yeah,
had a weekly magazine in the 19th century and into the 20th, pulp magazines. There's one dude who wrote over 1,000 Nick Carter novels. So
wow.
it's an insane. In 1964, my father was asked to reboot the character as a James Bondian super spy,
Nice.
who was called the Kill Master. It was the 60s. And there
Yes,
are
yes.
200, he wrote the first three, but there are 250 of those. Um, and it occurred to me that how can the 19th century guy be 35 years old in 1964?
Hmm.
So I connected that dot with enormous help. I have to say, there's a great pulp historian named Jess Nevins. If you've heard of him, it's probably because he's the one who painstakingly annotated Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Oh,
Jess
wow.
is the
Okay.
guy who told you on page 5 in panel 3 that's this little known Victorian children's book character. He's great at that.
Nice.
So I reached out
Nice.
to Jess and just gave me the skinny on Nick on 19th century Nick Carter. He was the only person I could think of who had definitely read the books, and I found out he used to maintain a Nick Carter website. And Nick Carter also had the first supervillain in literature about 3-4 years before Professor Moriarty was Dr. Jack Quartz, and that is a
Ah,
hell of a supervillain name.
yes.
And Jess told me that Dr. Jack Quartz would frequently come back from the dead without explanation and had a suspended animation machine. So I went, that accomplishes everything I need.
Love it. Love it.
The guy that I'm trying to bring back from the dead 100 years later had a supervillain with suspended animation and regeneration. Okay, good. So anyway, that's
Perfect.
called Nick Carter Recalled to Life, and it's in the Dead Detectives anthology, which is probably coming out this fall. And it's just a longish short story, but I'm probably going to keep having fun with Secret Agent Nick Carter because that allows me to get out a lot of my mid-century modern spy movie yayas working on something.
And it's
So
somewhat of a family practice at this
and
point.
yeah, no, there's a the legacy aspect of it is very appealing, and I have
Yeah.
never written more in my father's voice. Like I didn't start out going like I'm going to write this exactly like he would have written it, but like
Mhm.
5 paragraphs in, I was like, there's kind of only one way for me to write this stuff. Which
Nice.
he had a very punchy, witty, fast-paced prose style, so it's a
Mhm.
lot of fun to write in. A lot of fun to write in.
Wonderful. And lots of fun things to explore, lots of things coming up,
Well,
and
thank
some
you.
spaces to hear many, many podcast episodes. And thank you for coming on this one as well and
Oh,
talking
my
with me.
pleasure, Jason. This was great.
Great, great. Glad to have you back anytime and safe travels to SDCC.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.